A new dawn indeed. The cost of fuel is at the highest just 2 days into President William Ruto's term. And is it a case of it will get worse before it gets better? Certain medication, you're told it will get worse before it gets better. Nonetheless, a bitter pill to swallow. Now, just a day after President William Ruto assumed office and announced a shift in the fuel subsidy program, terming it unsustainable, Kenyans wake up to the reality of the effect of his directive. Now, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, last night announced new pump prices, ending day-long anxiety. Super petrol will now retail at 179.3 cents per litre, up by 20 shillings 18 cents minus the subsidy. Diesel and kerosene went up by 25 shillings and 20 shillings per litre respectively, inclusive of slashed subsidy. The prices are inclusive of the 8% value-added tax in line with provisions of the Finance Act 2018 and other legal instruments. In the past 2 months, the government retained the prices of super petrol, diesel and kerosene at 159 shillings and 14 shillings and 129 per litre respectively. The promise has been fulfilled and the standoff is over. President William Ruto yesterday presided over the swearing-in ceremony of 4 judges into the Court of Appeal and 2 into the Environment and Lands Court, effectively ending a 3-year stalemate. And that stalemate was between 2 arms of government, that is the executive and judiciary. In the event, at the event in State House, Nairobi, attended by Chief Justice Martha Koome and her deputy Philomena Mwilu, the head of state noted that his government will not be an quote-unquote animal farm where some animals are more equal than others, seeming to once again hit out at the former regime, that of the former President Uhuru Kenyatta. Also of key interest was the presence of Chief Justice Emeritus David Maraga, which could be read as a statement sent to former President Uhuru Kenyatta. That report brought to us by Ibrahim Karanja.
24 hours after formally appointing them to the Court of Appeal and the Environment and Lands Court respectively, President William Ruto made good his promise. Wednesday at State House, Nairobi, Chief Justice Martha Koome, Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu and the Registrar of the Judiciary, Anne Amadi, arrived accompanying the 6. Also in tow were the families of the 6 judges.
I, Mchelule Agri Otsiula.
I, Corinne Weldon Kipyegon.
I, Odunga George Vincent.
Joel Maurangugi, Judge of the Court of Appeal, do swear in the name of the Almighty God.
In a surprise appearance at the function was former Chief Justice David Maraga, whose reign at the judiciary saw the 2 arms of government go for each other's jugular due to the failure by the executive to appoint the judges.
We will promote dialogue between institutions and positive engagement so that we can all focus on how to take Kenya to a higher level. Whenever there are issues, there is always a mechanism for us to resolve whatever issues that may arise in the course of all of us discharging our separate mandates. And there is room in the Constitution for consultation.
The entry of the 4 judges into the Court of Appeal now raises to 24 the number of judges in the court, 6 judges short of the recommended number of 30 judges, while the additional 2 judges to the Environment and Lands Court increases the number of judges in the court to 53.
And therefore, there must never be the case of the animal farm, where there are people who are more equal than others. We are all equal before the law.
Clearly mending fences of what was a rough patch between the executive and the judiciary, President William Ruto has truly kept his word, overseeing the swearing in of the 6 judges. The president once again committing to respect the judiciary, acknowledging that as president, his office has limitations. Ibrahim Karanja, NTV from State House in Nairobi.
It was quite the packed day for President William Ruto in his second day in office as he held talks with various leaders from the continent, top on the agenda being security and strengthening the country's and region's economic agenda. Ruto hosted various delegations at State House, Nairobi, Somalia's President Hassan Mohamud, South Africa's Salva Kiir Mayardit, Congo-Brazzaville's Sassou Nguesso, as well as Ghana's Deputy President Mahmoud Bawumia were among those who held talks with Ruto. The president said he will ensure bilateral relations which foster development of the nation. On the other hand, First Lady Rachel Ruto also met with the Second Lady of Ghana, Samira Bawumia, and thereafter met Zabron choir members from Tanzania. The First Lady later on also met with some religious leaders who paid her a courtesy call at State House. President William Ruto's inauguration now sets in motion the delivery of promises by the Kenya Kwanza government. The next hurdle is now the formation of cabinet, critical appointments in delivering on the Kenya Kwanza Alliance manifesto, with Kenyans seemingly anxious for the unveiling of President Ruto's cabinet, with speculation on whether he will unveil new faces and lean towards technocrats like his predecessor, or he will appoint his political allies who've been through the trenches with him as a reward for their loyalty. Will Ruto's government also set precedents on the implementation of the 2/3 gender rule? That is the question. NTV's Melita Oletengas reports on what President William Ruto's cabinet could look like.
President William Ruto and his deputy Rigathi Gachagua are now faced with the Herculean task of constituting their cabinet. The nominations to be approved by Parliament, a crucial part of executing the pledges contained in the Kenya Kwanza manifesto. The current cabinet capped at 22 cabinet secretaries.
Is it going to be about closeness only, or is it going to be about core competencies that can come to the bear to deliver not only his vision for the country, but also to deal with the harsh economic times we find ourselves in?
According to Article 152 of the Constitution on the cabinet, the president shall nominate and, with the approval of the National Assembly, appoint cabinet secretaries. A cabinet secretary shall not be a member of parliament. The president may reassign a cabinet secretary. The president may dismiss a cabinet secretary.
She's the constant wind that fills my sail, oh.
While it is clear that the ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi will be the prime cabinet secretary, Ruto's cabinet list remains vague, despite competing interest within the Kenya Kwanza Alliance. Former National Assembly Speaker Justin Muturi, who dropped his presidential bid to support William Ruto, Kimani Ichung'wah, the MP for Kikuyu, Ndindi Nyoro, Kiharu MP, Alice Wahome, Kandara MP, Cleophas Malala, who lost in the Kakamega gubernatorial race, former Tharaka Nithi Senator Kithure Kindiki, former Kajiado South MP Kato Ole Metito, former governors Josephat Nanok, Salim Vuria, and Alfred Mutua are among politicians jostling for cabinet slots.
Competition could only be if you come from a region where William foresees in 2027 he will need votes from that region. Ukambani is one such region. You've got Western Kenya as a region. So the question, will he do raids of different stuff? So for example, in Nyanza, seeing that probably Raila Odinga might be in trouble in that particular region, the coast, will he do a raid? So the thing is, will he want to do regional balance and to create some sort of regional momentum so he gets more votes in 2027?
Ruto signed a women's charter in June 2022, which shall be reviewed every 6 months to ensure strict implementation of his manifesto. Ruto pledged to give women 50% of the cabinet slots.
If we achieve 50% parity in cabinet, it will be a record-breaking cabinet. It has never been done before. Are there enough women to actually take such positions? Yes, there are.
Questions linger on whether, like his predecessor, Ruto will nominate technocrats to his cabinet or he will reward his loyalists. However, it shall be a tough balancing act to have a composite picture of the country in his cabinet. Ruto has vowed to establish the Ministry of Diaspora to address issues affecting Kenyan citizens abroad and also establish a Ministry of Cooperatives and SMEs Development. Melita Oletenges, NTV.
I thought Mark Bichachi was going a different way with that statement on are there enough women. I was about to take up the cudgels. The 13th Parliament, whose first session officially started last week after the swearing in of its new members, is now set for its next battle for leadership positions and constitution of committees. Already the two key coalitions, that is the ruling Kenya Kwanza Alliance and Azimio la Umoja One Kenya, have planned separate retreats for their teams to largely negotiate for positions that are up for grabs, and Duncan has that report on the committees.
Kenya Kwanza leadership will be Naivasha, Nakuru County from Friday afternoon for a 2-day retreat with its members of parliament, while Azimio la Umoja will be in Machakos County as well, as the two coalitions prepare to transfer their political war from campaigns to parliament.
Returning officer of this election.
House leadership will be the next battlefront between the two camps, as each lays claim on the majority party leadership in the National Assembly.
And we've also had the honor and the trust of their own electorates.
Legally, Azimio la Umoja has the numbers after the August 9th general election, but immediately after the announcement of presidential election results, Kenya Kwanza poached a number of its members, giving their formation numerical advantage that was instrumental in swaying election of Moses Wetangula as House Speaker. Therefore, while Azimio has legal backing for majority party leadership, Kenya Kwanza has the numbers, at least for now. Whereas Azimio will have its way should the Speaker follow the law, ironically, it will be the same that will take charge of powerful watchdog committees. That is the Public Accounts and the Public Investment Committee, since they are a preserve of parties that are not in government. According to the new standing orders, National Assembly's Public Investments Committee has been split into 3, being Governance and Education, Commercial Affairs and Energy, and then we have Social Services, Administration and Agriculture, meaning they will have 3 chairpersons in addition to that of the Public Accounts Committee. Other plum positions up for grabs are in the powerful Parliamentary Service Commission, PSC, which is responsible for daily running of Parliament, and the House Business Committees for both houses. All the 418 members of Parliament will undergo a 4-day induction next week. The 350 from the National Assembly will be Nairobi, while Senate 68 will be Naivasha starting Monday. Duncan Haemba, NTV.
The politics, actually, I do beg your pardon. I refer to him only by his first name, that is Duncan Haemba. I could argue you should know people. The politics surrounding the port of Mombasa have finally brought the two rival coalitions on the same table as they seek to revert services back to Mombasa. The executive order issued Tuesday by President William Ruto now paves the way for the government to streamline services at the port of Mombasa, which will now see several business enterprises shut down, at the same time pave way for the political promises. Kevin Mutai has more from Mombasa on what this means.
The directive issued by President William Ruto to revert port services back to Mombasa has not yet been implemented, with the Kenya Ports Authority revealing that relevant teams are still consulting to come up with concrete guidelines on areas of necessary adjustment and realignments.
The way they did it is any company that has been registered out of Mombasa cannot collect their goods in Mombasa. They have to collect their goods in the ICD or Naivasha or wherever else. And the impact of that, of course, is that now you're forced to close down the warehouses here. You're forced to close down the clearing and forwarding companies here.
The inland depots which had been opened had denied Kenya Ports Authority the much needed revenue, because Kenya Ports Authority has not been, as a delivery point, had actually ceded a lot of, percentage of cargo being delivered by the CFSs.
Stakeholders want the port of Mombasa connected to Malaba to facilitate cargo movement towards hinterland. They say the plan was halted after the birth of Naivasha Inland Container Depot, despite KPA buying land in Malaba, Kisumu, Eldoret and Nairobi for the construction of the dry ports.
Mombasa being an inland depot to take care of the transit cargo, I think that was a misplaced arrangement. It should not. Naivasha must relocate to Malaba so that all the 30% of the transit cargo now needs to be offloaded in Malaba. And that is where Kenya Ports Authority initially had made the first plans.
Kazi zile zirudishwe haraka sana kutokana na uwezo wake wa urais, utakuwa umeokoa familia nyingi kutoka Mombasa paka Southern Corridor Malaba. Biashara zimefungwa kuanzia Mombasa hadi Malaba, huko Mtito Andei, Mazeras.
Part of the directive will also address cargo railage via SGR.
Ni kitu tumekuwa tukipigania kwa muda sana. Na tulieleza wazi ya kwa hata kama ni kulipa deni lile la SGR, kuna njia mubadala ambao kwamba unaweza kutumika. Sio lazima kuumiza uchumi wa eneo moja peke yake. Sio lazima kuumiza uchumi wa eneo moja peke yake.
The businessmen there were forced to transport their goods from Mombasa to Naivasha. So basically it means the port operation will be back to normal the way it used to be. And the port now belongs to the good people of the Republic of Kenya, but not few cartels.
The county government of Mombasa collects at least 27% of its revenue from services such as logistics, clearing and forwarding, and even storage, among others, translating to billions of shillings. The county now says the finance bill of 2022 will align issuance of all licenses through an online platform in order to fast-track ease of doing business.
Mombasa was a deserted city after the previous regime, the era and era of previous regimes that destroyed the economy of Mombasa. So we are happy that the operations are back, and we want to thank him because he kept his word.
Amejali maslahi ya wapwani. Maraisi wengi waliotangulia walipuuza pwani na wakaifuja pwani kwa rasilimali zao. Sasa ni matumaini ya mpwani kurudi katika hali yake na utendakazi wake.
Kevin Mutai, NTV in Mombasa.
All right, let's take a look at the dailies this morning. And joining me in studio is Dr. Caroline Mose, a good governance campaigner. I have baptized you. You saw on the poster. I'm also joined by Asaska Labarakwe. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Do you have a nickname? What do your friends call you?
Just Asaska.
Asaska. Okay.
Yes.
Asaska it is. So happy to have you with us in studio.
Thank you.
She is a public policy expert. So karibuni ladies, we were meant to be joined by Daisy Amdani. Unfortunately, as is often the case with life, some things come up that you really cannot help. So she will not be here this morning, but she will be here next Thursday morning, God willing. And front page of the Daily Nation. Baptism by fire as Ruto faces fuel crisis. The president had a busy first day in State House, holding meetings with foreign guests who attended his inauguration and witnessed the swearing in of 6 judges his predecessor refused to appoint. He concluded with crucial talks to confront his immediate dilemma yet, how to check runaway fuel prices without a costly subsidy. Now here is a quote attributed to him by the Daily Nation. The interventions in place have not borne any fruit on fuel subsidy alone. alone, the taxpayers have spent 144 billion shillings. If this subsidy continues to the end of the financial year, it will cost the taxpayer 280 billion, equivalent to the entire national government development budget. If I'm not mistaken, this has been taken from his inauguration speech. Let's take a look at those new prices on Twitter. The Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority has posted those new numbers. So let's take a look at them now. And scrolling up here, I can see that Super Petrol. No, this is the landing cost, but they present an explanation that, taking into account the weighted average cost of imported refined petroleum products and in line with the government policy to progressively remove subsidy on petroleum fuels and changes in to remove subsidy on petroleum fuels, the changes in the maximum allowed petroleum pump prices in Nairobi are as follows. Super petrol, diesel and kerosene increased by 20.18 shillings per litre, 25 shillings per litre and 20 shillings per litre respectively. So that is diesel increases by 25 shillings, kerosene increases by 20 shillings and super petrol by 20 shillings. So what does that translate to? Let's take a look here, and we start with Mombasa. Mombasa, that means super petrol will retail at 176 shillings and 98 cents. Diesel 162.76 cents. Kerosene 145.69 cents. Nairobi 179 shillings 30 cents. 165 shillings. That is for diesel. Yes, it is. And kerosene, 147 shillings, 94 cents. A further explanation, no, that's the extent of the explanation that has been provided. But Dennis Itumbi did tweet this, saying, if you missed that part of the speech, that is the inauguration speech, which the Daily Nation has captured on its front page, read again and benefit from the discussion underpinning the decision. Carol, when we spoke last evening, you were rushing to fuel up ahead of this increase. Did you do so? What was the experience like? And Asaska, as she responds to that, this is not something, Dennis Itumbi says it was part of the inauguration speech. I didn't hear it on the campaign trail. Would it have made a difference, Carol?
Yes, I did get to fuel. And because I had had, we all had on the grapevine that fuel was going to go up. But we've been talking about this even here in this studio, that the fuel subsidy under rules of the IMF was supposed to be removed a long time ago. And there were also plans to remove the subsidy anyway with this government, because there was the impression that it was not necessarily doing what it was supposed to do. Because we've had even the fuel marketers have not been paid through that subsidy for the last 4 months. So that begs the question, where has this money for this subsidy been going? So there were always plans to remove that subsidy, and we were all bracing ourselves. In fact, we were bracing ourselves for a figure upwards of 200 to the fuel, so to the litre unleaded. So this was expected, this was always expected, this was always going to happen. And I'm only concerned about the hyperinflation that is most likely going to hit everybody because of these. We've never had fuel, one, increased by 20 shillings, I think, and we've never had fuel at 179. This is extreme. So, my heart shudders for the people who are on the lower rungs of the economy, because the hyperinflation is going to be brutal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Asaska.
Thank you, Olive. Just as my colleague here has mentioned, as usual, as we all know, consumption subsidies are usually quite costly, and are not really impactful, and therefore it brings a lot of uncertainty in the market, as we've seen with the fuel subsidy. And I think I applaud His Excellency President Ruto in biting the bullet and removing the subsidy, because as much as it will bring a lot of chaos and definitely increase the cost of living, because as you know, increase in fuel costs has a knock-on effect on both transport and consumption costs. So yeah, we need to look, our future does not look very good moving forward, but I think it's a good thing to fix this economy. We need some tough rules.
So it's like medicine, is what I'm hearing the two of you say. For us to recover economically, there's a bitter pill we have to swallow it, and it starts with this, I suppose.
Exactly. I mean, we could say that, but who is swallowing this bitter pill? That is the question we have to ask. Who is responsible for this mess? You know, I do understand where the analogy of the bitter pill is coming from, but why is the ordinary Kenyan the one swallowing that bitter pill? You know, we are here because of decisions that were made by the past government. We can now call it that, you know, the Uhuru government. And those decisions, we were not consulted. The loans, the extreme spending, the extreme, you know, grand theft, you know, was that was going on. We were not consulted. We were not party to it, but we are going to have to be party to this so-called bitter pill. And, you know, we have to ask ourselves, who is that bitter pill for? Because the common mwananchi, who is the one holding the weight of these decisions, is the one who ends up actually bearing the brunt. Quite unfairly, we have to add. So, you know, we have to ask. Yes, we understand these things have to be done, but the questions everybody is asking, or the main question everyone is asking, is why? You know, why are we where we are? Of course, we know why we are here, and we know that we have to dig ourselves, you know, out of this hole. Do we keep digging, or what do we do to come out of this hole? But I mean, like I said, my chief concern is the people at the so-called bottom of the pyramid. This is going to be very, very difficult for many people in this country.
Okay, and reading through a number of the monthly EPRA reports on fuel and why it costs what it costs. Usually you hear they talk about the landing costs of fuel, and then they talk about the dollar. Are you saying, Carol, that this is about more than that?
I think so. We know that there are a number of taxes and processing fees that come to over 100, 200 million every month. There is a fee that, you know, and you know, when it comes to fuel subsidies and how fuel is costed in this country, nobody really likes going straight to the point. Yes, there are all those landing fees, but I think even the international price on fuel has not been escalating for the last couple of months. But yet here we are. And there are a lot of hidden costs. There have been lots of processing fees and things happening in the background. And these monies have been going to the pockets of a select few. And now we are beginning to hear these stories as the politicians become more and more forthright about what was happening in the Uhuru government. So yes, all these things, you know, they are valid, but there are a lot of hidden taxes, hidden fees, hidden things that are going on there that are making the prices of fuel go very high unnecessarily. So I think, yes, there are things, there are charges that have been going on in the background. We are yet to see how President Ruto is going to deal with that. He probably has, because once that subsidy was removed from the unleaded and it went to 179 instead of 214, there's something there that he must have done. Unless this is the first step towards another hike in another month. We shall see how that goes. But yes, I don't think those costs that are placed there are really, I think there are other costs that have been going on in the background, going to the pockets of a few.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Here's the bit about landed costs and such. The price, EPRA tells us the prices are inclusive of 8% value-added tax, yes, in line with the provisions of the Finance Act of 2018, the Tax Laws Amendment Act 2020, and the revised rates for excise duty adjusted for inflation. So that is what, those are the contributory factors you're making reference to, I imagine, Carol. Yes. And then here's what I was talking about. The average landed cost of imported super petrol decreased actually by 24.31% from $1,074 per cubic meter in July of 2022 to 112 per cubic US dollars per cubic meter in August 2022. Diesel decreased by 13.9% from $1,103 US dollars per cubic meter to $949 US dollars per cubic meter, while kerosene decreased by 19% from $1,111 per cubic meter to $899.56 per cubic meter. That is captured in this table. Carol, you talked about, you expected what to go up to 214.
We were expecting, you know, if once that fuel subsidy was gone, the estimated price was going to hit above 200. So even that 179 was, I don't want to call it a relief because it's still a very high hike. But it's a bit of a relief. We were expecting that to go to around 204, 210 there. So 179 was a bit of a reprieve, although, you know, it's a hike by 20 shillings. So he must have done something there. And of course, we also know that fuel prices, like I said, have been decreasing somewhat on the international stage as well.
All right, so here they explain that although the subsidy for super petrol has been removed, a subsidy of 20 shillings per litre and 26 shillings per litre has been retained for diesel and kerosene respectively in order to cushion consumers from the otherwise high prices. I think that is what you're making a reference to. And then the bit about the US dollar is here. Over the same period, the mean monthly US dollar to Kenya shillings exchange rate depreciated by 0.60% from 119 per US dollar in July 2022 to 120 per US dollar in August of 2022. All right, so what does that mean for the subsidy on unga? Because it wasn't just fuel that was subsidized. Unga was also subsidized to 100 shillings, although people could not, given the anecdotal evidence that was shared with us, people could not access it. Claims that millers had not been paid and were therefore hoarding the flour. And so here it is, other areas of concern. The Daily Nation highlights unga subsidy. President regrets that 7 billion shillings was gobbled up in 1 month through a failed pre-election program to reduce the price of flour. Farm inputs push to ensure 1.4 million bags of cheap fertilizer are available next week to ease the burden on farmers. Pending bills, suppliers steeped in debt and whose lives have been ruined expect the government to speedily settle dues totaling 600 billion shillings. Taxes faced with rising expenditure and little financial wiggle room. New taxes that could raise the price of bottled water, juice and beer next month are inevitable. So those who thought they could take solace in the bottle, well, that, that has been shot to hell. Yes. But on the unga subsidy, Asaska, so was this a populist move?
Definitely, the unga subsidy was a populist move because it came right before elections, and it really benefited only a few people if you look at it. And Olive, don't forget that KNBS has reported that the month of August, last month, has been one of the most difficult months in the last decade in Kenya. And if you look at in the last couple of months, there have been so many queues for unga and fuel all over the country, and you'll realize that unga prices has increased by 38% compared to last year at the same time like now. So definitely this has been a populist a subsidy that did not really help. Actually, it has caused more havoc.
All right, I'm trying just, ladies, Carol, you talked about the highest price ever. Yes. I can see a poster here, and if Julian Zamboko gives this a tick that it is accurate, super petrol, so this is indeed the highest price ever. Super petrol price per litre rises, as we've said, by 20 shillings to retail at a record high of 179.30. That is 179 shillings 30 cents in Nairobi. No subsidy included. A litre of diesel up by 25 shillings, but that includes a 20 shilling subsidy. Kerosene up by 20 shillings, but includes a 26.25 subsidy. Now, on the question of the cost of living, ladies, what I'm hearing you say is we should brace ourselves for tougher times yet.
Yes, we should. But I also want to laud the subsidy on diesel and kerosene were not removed entirely. And I think that was to cushion industry, because industry runs on diesel, and also to cushion people who use kerosene as fuel in the home. So there has been an attempt to try and stem the tide, this tide that is coming for industry. Even the matatu industry, for example, the transport industry runs on diesel. So there has been that I think very wise decision to maintain a bit of subsidy on diesel and kerosene, and to cushion the poor, because many of the poor still use kerosene. They're not able to afford gas. So many of them are still using kerosene in their homes as their key source of fuel for cooking and doing many other things. So I think that was the rationale behind that. Remove the subsidy on unleaded, or on petrol, but still maintain it on diesel and kerosene to cushion at least that hyperinflation that is most likely going to hit. Should we brace ourselves? Yes, we should. When you see those prices going up anyway, it means everything, our tokens are going to go up. Price of food is going to go up, because if a farmer has to add more money to transport food from somewhere else to a market in Nairobi or any other city, it means the prices hike. Everything is going to go up. We are happy about, the more affordable fertilizer that is supposed to be in the market, I think by Monday, which is what I think the president said in his speech. By Monday, we should be seeing cheaper, the so-called farm inputs that are here on the paper. So I think that is also going to try and assuage the high costs, so that at least in the short term, in terms of food production, we see, a more affordable access to fertilizer for many farmers. And I think this is going to be directed specifically to people who are in the food production business, not necessarily in flowers or any of these other horticultural endeavors. So yes, we should brace ourselves. We should brace ourselves. But I think we should also be a bit hopeful. I don't think it's all hope down the drain. At the end of the day, we are a very resilient people. This is serious, though. It's quite serious, so we need to brace ourselves.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm looking, you talked about farm inputs and fertilizer subsidies, and I'm referencing Dennis Itumbi's tweet on the subject because he's what, the chief of the Hustler Nation Intelligence Bureau, and he says the subsidy was just a way of a few people making money, including multinationals. Kenyan taxpayers were paying to assure those people profit. While that was going on, the cost of living remained high. Instead, President Ruto, in his speech, took the bolder decision of making fertilizer available at 3,500 shillings. He mentioned seed and farm inputs next. That way, farmers get empowered. Food eventually is produced at lower prices and inflation is checked. That is the hard working that the past ignored, but someone needed to bite the bullet, and the president on day one did just that. Does it give you comfort, Asaska, that the price of fertilizer is going to go down? Do you think it will make a difference?
Yes, as Caro has mentioned, I think it's not just all gloom. I think we need to be hopeful, and as we've seen yesterday on President Ruto's inaugural speech, he had put up raft policies and projects that will help in lowering costs of living, and one of them is slashing fertilizer costs. As we know, he has to take some bold steps, as Dennis Itumpi had mentioned in his tweet that you've just read. And one of the things that President Ruto needs to do is reduce unnecessary government expenditures. And also, maybe he might consider putting on hold capital-intensive projects, like the infra projects. And also, I think he needs to review budgets of some crucial programs that will have direct impact on lowering the cost of living, like agriculture. We've seen he's already promised slashing down the cost of fertilizer by literally half. And also the Department of Energy, Water, Irrigation, and Manufacturing, because these have direct impact in reducing the cost of living in the long term.
All right. So we're looking longer term here for some relief.
Yes, I read a thread by Ramanyang on Twitter, I think yesterday, and he was also arguing that if we really are serious about reducing inflation and bringing down the cost of living, if anything else, if there is no extreme, and I think these are the words he used, extreme fiscal discipline, almost to a military degree, then all these things that are being discussed here will not necessarily be implementable, and that the cost of living will remain high. Because one, inflation is already at an all-time high. Two, we've had a lot, we've seen a lot of indiscipline in terms of the expenditure, the public purse. Three, there were discussions around increasing the tax, the basis of tax, and according to many economists I've seen discussing these on Twitter, that is not necessarily possible because we are already overtaxed as Kenyans as it is. And there was a promise both in the Kenya Kwanza manifesto and on the campaign trails that for business people especially, there was going to be an attempt to reduce the costs of licensing, the costs of if you want to begin, a new business, there was going to be reduced cost and reduced bureaucracy. And these are usually the ways in which both the national government and the county governments actually raise funds, and that's how they collect their revenues. So there was that kind of are we taking one route or the other? If we go with the route of trying to alleviate for SMEs, and at the same time trying to compel county governments to reduce the licensing fees and all these fees, especially for a county like Nairobi, where I think we have millions and millions that are being collected in terms of licensing fees, parking fees, and all these small fees that directly affect, the business owner or, any person that is doing business, specifically even the so-called hustlers. So these two things appear to be in contrast to one another. Are we going to alleviate that? And if we do that, then it means we are decreasing the taxes. And so how do we increase tax? In terms of the revenue collection vis-a-vis alleviating these high costs of doing business. So there was that, there was a disconnect between these two things. And so, and at the end of the day, we also have, the inflation. We have a lot of, I think, loans to pay. And even the interest on those loans are extremely high. I think for every 100 shillings, either 60 or 70 is going back into repaying the loans. So when you are sitting in an economy that is like that, and then of course you have the huge, bill in terms of all these CSs and the CASs and all these government officials with all the expenditures that come with that. According to Ramanyang and many others that I've read on the socials, if there is no extreme fiscal discipline, then all these things are going to be more or less hot air, because that's now the new vocabulary we are using.
Hot air.
It might end up being hot air, and we might end up being hit by a very extreme, inflation going on for a couple of years, if not longer. So these are things for us to, I'm very curious to see how the president is going to deal with this, because he appears to have hit the ground at a high pace you know, he's not resting, he's out there. And so I'm curious to see how he is going to reconcile these two things, alleviate the cost of living, alleviate some of these costs of doing business and the high taxes, and at the same time continue to diversify the tax base and collect more revenue, perhaps in a more efficient manner. So these are two things that I'm curious to see how the president is going to deal with.
All right.
Yes.
Is this the tweet you're making reference to, actually? I opened up a tweet here. I don't know whether it's the one you were talking about. Ramanyang, after the reckless borrowing and erratic tax policies of the last decade by a government he was a part of, there's limited room for maneuver. Much as we love vilifying Bretton Woods bodies here, we only have ourselves to blame for the fiscal crisis we find ourselves in today.
I don't think that was it. Is that there was a long thread of it. He was talking about, you know, the plans that the president has in terms of trying to alleviate cost of living vis-a-vis increasing the tax bases. And so those two things to him, and I agreed with him, appear to be in contrast to one another.
All right, so
yes.
I'll trace it.
I'll
find it. We need to take a break, so it'll give me time to do just that. But Asaska, when we come back, this is the last page, back page. Staying in the theme of our economy, the last back page of the Daily Nation, impact of reverting port operations to Mombasa will be a shift to road haulage, slashing cargo business for SGR. Taxpayers to foot SGR on Ruto port order. Kenyans will bear the brunt of repaying the Chinese loan should SGR business reduce. We get deeper into that on the other side of this break.
Dust off your Subaru and upgrade your Lexus, because Coop Bank is now offering 100% financing on used cars. With Coop Bank pre-owned car financing, anyone with an income can walk into a second-hand dealership, select the car that best suits them and get financing from Cooperative Bank. To find out more, walk into a Cooperative Bank near you for details. Terms and conditions apply.
Your generosity imesaidia kuignite a love for reading in our children. Nunua any Cadbury Story Edition packs, scan QR code, na generously share your homegrown story. Cadbury, there's a glass and a half in everyone.
At each stage of your business cycle, there are different opportunities and challenges. Has your business evolved and made strides to adapt and be the best in your field? Enter the 2022 Top 100 Mid-Sized Companies Survey and showcase how you have driven success at every stage of your business. Submit your entry at www.eastafricatop100.com. Survey extended till 7th October 2022. Top 100 SMEs. Be seated among the great.
He said that he wants the footage to be raw and gritty. Fortunately, I was able to call them, and now we are back on the right track.
You don't want to cross me, Victoria. You know me well, and what I'm capable of doing.
Why do I have to be there? I don't have to explain anything. No way I'm going there. Bye.
Forever, my love.
Get peace of mind and protect the ones you love with the power of Dettol Bar Soap. It cleans and protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs. So no matter what type of mum you are, trust Dettol.
This is NTV.
All right, welcome back to AM Live. As you saw there, it is our day, Kutawala. That is women commenting on the current affairs of the day. Do note we are not limited to quote-unquote women issues, because Kenyan issues are women issues and women issues are Kenyan issues. All right, I found that thread you're making reference to, Carol. Pretty much a continuation of Jubilee policies going by some of the economic data points WSR for those not in the know, William Samoei Ruto is making here. Education reform comments are certain to get the attention of parents with children in the CBC system. Some initial impressions to follow. His initial impressions are this: there's lots of things that do not add up in the economic measures WSR is proposing. He says on one hand that he wants to expand the tax base. It's a worthy goal given that we have a narrow tax base, but where is this expansion going to happen, and why can't expand CIT and payee yield, for instance, if you have government already squeezing the living daylights out of businesses battered by the pandemic, erratic tax policy and lousy service delivery? If anything, they need a tax cut. And we had just the other day, inauguration day on Tuesday, Professor Xen Iraqi, professor of economics, and he actually said perhaps a tax cut could stimulate the economy. Ramanyang continues to stay. So he's a business reporter. This is his area of speciality for those not familiar with him. He says we'll make it easier for SMEs to set up and operate. WSR says easier said than done, especially if county governments facing a revenue squeeze of their own do not play ball. A simpler licensing regime, as county governments see it, equals loss of revenue and greater reliance on treasury. So how do you, as WSR, get round to squaring that circle? Interesting terminology there. Several other contradictions also emerged. Supplier debt rose 40% year-on-year to over 500 billion shillings by end of June. Debt service costs are still sky high, 1 trillion plus in the 2022-23 financial year. You could cut taxes to spur growth, but that implies a wider fiscal deficit. And there's all these other fancy promises to pay for somehow, either via debt or via tax concessions, which let enterprising Kenyans get on with it. It will be nigh impossible to keep taxes as is and still pay for all these extra promises given GOK inefficiency and graft. Cracking that supplier debt problem, that is one of the things that was highlighted on the front page of the Daily Nation. Cracking the supplier debt, and I think it was 600 billion shillings. Supplier debt problem will be an interesting one, short of issuing multiple IFBs to clear all of it or part of it. WSR's finance minister won't have much room to clear it from tax revenue, not unless we see unheard of levels of discipline from ministries and SOEs. Re-affordable credit, there's a ton of merit in his argument that CRB system as currently implemented is a mess. Your credit score ideally should translate to lower or higher credit pricing, not an outright ban, but there are caveats there. And ideally, for that sliding scale of credit pricing to work, you need to agree on what a framework for that is between banks and the regulator CBK. That is not what is happening now. So absent a clear path to risk-based pricing, talk of CRB reform is a dead end. And then that affordable housing pledge, we've heard it before, didn't happen last time round. Remember that horrible idea of mandatory contributions to a national housing fund? Do you remember that, ladies? So what is different this time? Strictly speaking, taxpayers have no rational reason to believe it. Fertilizer delivered at lower prices, but who is picking up the tab in the price difference? The taxpayer, or is the state just going to throw another SOE under the bus that has happened with NCPB in past dodgy populist grain import schemes? And I think I'm reaching the end here. Side note, a lot of answers could be provided to these queries by a broad wave of tax law amendments to come to Parliament as a first order of business for the 13th Parliament. Will it happen though? Is that discipline and focus present in this government? Jury's out on that. It's impossible for a tax base that's been squeezed mega hard to now magically have faith that the same government that's been wasting their taxes has now had a road to Damascus moment, and it will have the fiscal discipline of a monk.
Yes.
Words are insufficient. If GOK really says it is serious about fiscal discipline and doing more with our limited tax base, then it must demonstrate it first. Roads, for one, can't be built shoddily. All right, so these are his sentiments, but I don't know whether you have a response to that, Asaska, before we move on to the SGR and what restoring the clearance of cargo to the port of Mombasa will mean for you and I, the taxpayer. Any comment on this?
Definitely. Ramayang is definitely a realist to me. He appears as one. And I mean, he's saying it as it is. I mean, there's nothing much to do, Olive, except to be hopeful moving forward and to see that President Ruto keeps to his promises and pledges he made to Kenyans.
All right. So Kenyans will bear the brunt of repaying the Chinese loan should SGR business reduce. This is the gift, to put it one way, that keeps on giving. President Uhuru Kenyatta, or rather now the former President Uhuru Kenyatta, Rigathi Gachagua, the deputy president, referred to him as retired President Uhuru Kenyatta, had promised to make the terms of this deal public. That never happened. Are you hopeful, Asaska, that under the regime of Dr. William Samoei Ruto, that will change?
I hope so. Olive, remember that our constitution upholds transparency and openness as anchored in Article 10, Article 35, Sub-Article 3, as well as Article 232 of our constitution. And this has been buttressed by the Access to Information Act of 2016. And if you remember, Olive, on the campaign trail, President Ruto did promise Kenyans that he'll make these contracts public. And myself and many other Kenyans are really looking forward to peruse these contracts from the expressway to the SGR and many others. So I think if President Ruto keeps to his promise, I think we'll be able to access, look at the terms of these loans. Did they have value for money for Kenyans, and what impact will these loans have on taxpayers?
Okay, but Carol, yes, you know, not to be a wet blanket, but don't you think there was perhaps merit in what President Uhuru Kenyatta had sought to do? If you read this report by P. Tamburu, he says his predecessor Uhuru Kenyatta moved cargo clearance to the Nairobi Inland Container Depot to help ease congestion at the Mombasa port and boost its competitiveness, while also boosting traffic on the SGR to drive revenue for debt repayment and support operations. The decision by Mr. Kenyatta boosted SGR operations, with cargo forming nearly 90% of its operations from a revenue stand, and 8% proportion of the country's revenue that were lost, by the transfer of port operations from Mombasa. But the expected immediate impact of reverting port operations to Mombasa will be a shift to road haulage, slashing cargo businesses for the SGR. This will come with implications for the taxpayer, since the SGR has debt obligations that the National Treasury would have to foot through public coffers. What do you make of this? Catch-22?
I mean, it's definitely a catch-22. And yes, I know what Peter Mburu has said here. Uhuru Kenyatta moved cargo clearance to Nairobi Inland Container to help ease congestion. But we also know that on the ground, how that was implemented was very punitive to very many people along that chain. You know, a lot of business was removed from the port. And even in easing that so-called congestion, what really happened was that a lot of business was removed from the port. So do you ease congestion by removing a port from the port to inland? And I even had very many business people complaining that once your cargo landed at the port, you were given 4 days to remove it and put it on the SGR and bring it inland for, you know, for all that. And for many people, that was an impossibility, because even how once your goods have landed, removing them from the ship to the port would take more than those 4 days. And after that, you'd be hit by compulsory demurrage charges, which were very expensive. So even how this was implemented was very suspicious and was seen as being done to benefit one person, because even the deals that were done with this SGR, you know, all those contracts, we never really saw them. you know, with the public. Of course, there are people who must have seen them. So even how that was implemented, I think, was very problematic. And I think this is what Ruto is trying to sort out. However, usually when you're moving from one extreme to the other extreme, you'll see some of these things. So now you remove all the clearance from this so-called inland port back to the port. And then it means that there is no cargo on the SGR, and that means higher loans, higher interests on this deal. And I think at some point we'll find a workable middle. So we've shifted from this point, we've come to this point, and we can already see what the problems are. So I think we'll have to find a way to do some clearance at the port, restore some business, you know, at the port, but also find a way to make the SGR a viable project. We can decide not to do that, but we will not, you know, the loans and the debts we have on that SGR are not going away. We'll still have to pay them. So we must find a way to make that SGR viable. It's there, it's been built, we're not going to destroy it. It's already there. So as you say, it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's the albatross around all our collective necks, and we must find a way of making it productive. We must find a way of making it profitable. If not, we just continue sinking into this hole that we find ourselves in.
All right. Okay, so Asaska, I'll move us along at this point. And 6 promoted judges take oath of office. Front page of the Daily Nation there, I see Justice Agre Muchalule, Justice George Odunga, Justice Joel Ngugi, Weldon Korir, Judith Omange, Makori Evans Kiago. What do you make of this decision? Was it wise to put aside the concerns that President Uhuru Kenyatta had as regards these judges? Agri Muchalule, for one, together with, Chitembwe, Said Chitembwe, had their offices raided by the DCI.
Thank you, Olive. I think this brings us to the discussion of independence of our judiciary systems, and that's particularly the judiciary and the GSC. And I think we will not understand why Article 173 of the Constitution is there, that gives the authority of the constitutional commissions and the 2 independent offices. And moving to reinforcement of Kenya's independent institution, we'll have to revisit Kenya's independence constitution. That was between 1963 to 2008. And you'll realize, Olive, that Kenya's pre-2010 constitutional dispensation did have statutory commissions, but these commissions were not entrenched in the Constitution as compared to today. So I think it's a bold move for President Ruto to go ahead and swear in the 6 judges of the Court of Appeal, because this gives the judiciary its independence to discharge its mandates in full.
All right, Asaska says it's in order. Do you agree, Dr. Mwese?
It is, because one of the key things that was in the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, which we all studied, because this, you know, this is the document through which we will begin to interrogate the Ruto government. He was very explicit that within 7 days of being sworn in, he was going to appoint all judges nominated to the Court of Appeal. And I remember reading in that manifesto that, this was very clear, that, and I quote, the Constitution of 2010 is the most important issue on the ballot. And there was, there was a concerted and clear effort from him saying that once he's president, he's going to focus on SDG number 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And in that same manifesto, one of the key things he said he was going to do was bolster all independent institutions as per Chapter 15 of the Constitution. And one of those independent institutions is the JSC. So once these people were actually cleared by the JSC, which is the Judicial Service Commission, it was not up to President Kenyatta to make an executive decision and say, I don't like these judges, because the JSC had done its job. So if we are going to have independent institutions, then we must trust that the process because the process of hiring judges is very clear. There is a procedure to it. They must, I think, submit to all these, you know, anti-corruption and EACC and all these things. We must trust our independent institutions by saying, I might not like you, Olive. I don't like how you look. I don't like what you did 5 years ago. I don't think you have changed. I think you're a leopard, and a leopard does not change its spots. But if an independent institution has cleared you, I cannot and I must not have the power, and I've not actually given a mandate by the Constitution to tell the JSC, I don't like this person that you have chosen. So what Uhuru, yes, he might have had concerns, which he was not very clear about. He just said, I don't like these judges. And we must also remember, this was off the, you know, he did not have the best relationship with the Constitution or the best relationship with independent. We remember he's the one who actually came out and said after the 2017 petition, you know, he was warning the judges and saying, we will revisit. And he said this many times, we will revisit. And so even in the context of that statement of we will revisit, which sounded like a very vengeful statement, what happened after that is that he had a very adversarial relationship with the courts. You know, funding was cut, funding was reduced, funding was denied. At some point, I remember the former Chief Justice Maraga making a statement and saying, we are frustrated by the executive. We are not being given money, there is no funding. So in the context of those happenings, in the context of that, Uhuru Kenyatta did not have the mandate to say, I don't like these judges. And we can see Chitembwe is actually not in that particular list. Will the judges deliver? They should, because again, if we allow independent institutions, even if we don't like what they're doing, as long as they're following the procedures that are laid out in the Constitution, we cannot come back and say we don't like what they're doing, because we need to allow these institutions to work. And one of those other institutions is the IEBC. And we can see, we've seen how interference with IEBC, actually, we've seen what actually that you know, yielded. So independent institutions must be allowed to be independent. And I like the trajectory that President Ruto is actually taking in saying we are going to allow independent institutions, including the judiciary, to operate independently. How that plays out is something that we are keen to follow and to see what happens going forward, yes. So,
Asaska, you do not view this as a reward to the judiciary for the Supreme Court upholding his election as the 5th President of the Republic of Kenya?
Not at all, and I agree with Carol here that our Constitution of Kenya 2010 did usher in a new era of constitutionalism through our constitutional commissions, and about 10 of them, and other independent offices. That's the Office of the Auditor General and the Control of Budget, as enshrined in Article 248 of our Constitution. That's Chapter 15 of our Constitution. And with these independent bodies do have core mandate of giving checks and balances of our government. And as we know, Kenya's 2010 constitutions did seek to bring an end to almost 4 decades plus of enormous power that have been given to the presidency. And as we know, independent institutions in Kenya are vehicles that deliver values and aspirations of the Kenyan people. And by that, one, they do respect the human rights, promotes accountability, as well as constitutionalism and open governance. And indeed, the main rationale of the emergence of Kenya's independent institutions, Olive, is the fact that it did find solution to bring about problem of accountability deficit in Kenya's governance. And we've seen this, that there's a lot of political interference in, for example, Kenya's judiciary, with the former President Uhuru Kenyatta saying that we shall revisit just after the outcome of the 2017 election petition, presidential election petition. And we also realize that there's a lot of you know, interference either by politicians or parliament, the National Assembly. And for example, if you look at the SRC, in 2016 and 2019, the National Assembly did attempt to interfere with their mandates when they tried to give a proposal on house allowance, for instance. And currently, just a couple months ago, when they tried to slash when they did propose slashing of the seating allowance for for members of the National Assembly. So we've seen that the Constitution has done, what the Constitution 2010 has done is to protect these independent institutions in discharging their mandates.
Okay, so I'm trying to pull up that speech because now substantively we've gotten into the conversation, which is this promise to reinforce the independence of these institutions. I hesitate to say independence of independent institutions, but independence of these institutions. Yes. Is it expedient or is it reformist, I think is the question we are posing. It is the question we are posing this morning. So I was trying to bring this up so that we can look at what else President William Ruto promised the judiciary. And I'm scrolling here. He talked of 3 billion shillings, Carol, for the judiciary, an additional 3 billion shillings. Yes. Here it is. I found it. So he says, my administration will scale up the budget. Actually, let me make this larger so that we can all be on the same page, pun intended. Here we go. Yes, my administration will scale up the budgetary allocation to the judiciary by an additional 3 billion shillings annually for the next 5 years. These resources will support the bottom-up scaling of justice by increasing the number of small claims courts from the current 25 to 100. We will also work with the judiciary to build high courts in the remaining 7 counties, magistrates courts in the remaining 123 sub-counties, and support the ongoing digitization program. These interventions will empower the judiciary to adjudicate and expeditiously conclude corruption cases, commercial disputes, and all other matters, thereby enhancing access to justice and efficiency in the judiciary. But before that, he said our campaign for financial independence of the judiciary has paid off with the implementation of the Judiciary Fund on July 1st this year. This is something he also made reference to when he went for the presidential debate solo. But he said this is in part credited to the Kenya Kwanza team, which he said had been agitating for just this on the campaign trail. Carol, expedient or reformist? A mix of the two.
I'm not sure about it being reformist or it being expedient. I think it's par for the cause. One thing we must realize that William Ruto started doing on the campaign trail was to distance himself quite vociferously and deliberately from Uhuru Kenyatta's government. And I think that is a continuing theme that we are seeing and we will continue to see. If you look at the relationship between, like I said, between Uhuru Kenyatta and the different institutions, it was very adversarial. And Uhuru Kenyatta had given himself some powers that were not necessarily constitutional in terms of how he was handling these independent institutions. And so I think the first call of business that William Ruto is actually going to do, and I think this is a theme we will see in how he operates as president, is to distance himself from that kind of narrative where he is seen as this imperial president that is wielding this power in a very, in very problematic ways. And I also want to add that if you look at the whys and wherefores of how Uhuru was running government, we can now see and we can now state that it appeared to be very chaotic and very shambolic, that things appear to have been running in part on autopilot. And I think what Ruto is doing is trying to distance himself from that mode of governance as well. So very hands-on, very sober, very, there is a certain focus that he has. And to add on to that, in the manifesto, and I think this is going to be a theme as well, he made reference to the BBI and said that was veering backwards, left and right from the Constitution, and to distance himself from this, from that entire shambolic venture. And I remember on the launch of the BBI, and I think this is one of the everlasting, I think, imagery we have of the relationship between Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga, and Ruto was this photograph of a very exuberant and very happy, to use those words, Uhuru during the launch of BBI, and in contrast, how disturbed William Ruto actually looked on that podium. This is one of those ever, you know, it's been circulating, that image. And I think very deliberately, Ruto wants to distance himself from those things that happen in that regime. So is it expedient? Is it reformist? I think it's par for the cause. I think Ruto wants to kickstart his presidency by saying, I am a president that will follow the law. I will follow the constitution. And I think he said this yesterday, that he doesn't want to run a government where you know, we are like the animal farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Will he succeed in that? I'm not really sure, because, you know, there are some people on that side of government that are very vocal on Twitter, but they have got murder charges hanging over their heads, and they're always quoting him, they're always tagging him and all these things. So, you know, will we see some sacred cows? I don't know. We might, because at the end of the day, the purpose, the reason why George Orwell wrote Animal Farm is that because all animals were equal, but some were more equal than others. So we might see some of that. Will we see that at the outset? Probably not. So I think what Ruto is doing is very deliberately in making that statement and saying, this is what I am doing with the judiciary, and it was actually part of his campaign promises, is saying that I am kickstarting my presidency, and it's going to be very different from what you were used to seeing the last 10 years. Part of which, I was, you know, he distanced himself from the second Jubilee term very successfully, and we all believed him when he said he wasn't a part of that. And I say that tongue in cheek. And I think he's now, you know, he's kickstarting his presidency by saying, I wasn't a part of that problematic government, and this is how I am kickstarting, by sticking to my campaign promises, sticking to the implementation and operationalization is the term they used, of the 2010 Constitution. So I think that is what he's doing. That is the tone he's setting for his presidency, at least the beginning, these few months and probably years of his presidency.
Okay.
Yes.
You talked about murder charges. Nothing comes to my mind.
We will not. These are all alleged murder charges. So we will leave them. We will leave them at that.
Yeah, but I'm off the top of my head, I can't think of who from their side.
We will talk about
okay,
that.
We'll talk about that in camera.
Yes.
Okay. Asaska, reformist, expedient. Carol has introduced par for the course.
Olive, I think for me it's too early to know whether it's expedient or a reformist move. But if you remember, on September 5th, 2022, President Ruto did promise Kenyans a government guided by the rule of law, a government devoid of political victimization, and he did promise that he will not interfere with independent institutions. And I think I applaud His Excellency Ruto, because he's I think the first president in Kenya's history that has promised to respect the judiciary as an equal arm of government, in respect to the separation of powers among the three arms of government, as well as putting a firm commitment for sufficient funding of the judiciary, and thus giving an enabling environment for Kenyans to enjoy the rights to access of justice. And by this I mean, one, he did boost the judiciary by an additional 3 billion additional money. And remember also, just in July 1st, I think 2020, this year, the National Treasury did operationalize the Judiciary Fund, and they did load up their account at the Central Bank with about 9 billion Kenya shillings. That's half of this year's 2022 and 2023 annual budgets for the judiciary. And I think this is an amazing move towards bringing about financial independence and autonomy to the judiciary. And this should not just end at giving the judiciary financial autonomy, but also I think we need to give the judiciary and other independent institutions, one, functional independence, so that they can work within their mandate to provide services to Kenyans. Number two, they also need to give these institutional independent institutions a mandate to operate without fear and without political interference. And number three, I think what we forget, as we've seen in the last couple of months, the judiciary has received a lot of backstabbing from Kenyans on Twitter, attacking them, a lot of fake news, misinformation and disinformation. I think we need to give space for our institutions to have a perspective, how we perceive them and how they do their work. They need to have also independence on how Kenyans can build confidence and perceive them that they can be trusted and do really implement their mandate to the T. And I think this is something that I'm looking forward as a Kenyan and as a woman to see that our independent institutions are given the authority as espoused in our constitution. And Olive, let's just not forget that one of the progressive provisions in our constitution is the judiciary fund, if I can mention a few. And number two is the two-third gender rule. And we've seen that these have still remained elusive since 2010 to date. And hopefully, the 13th Parliament shall look into fully effect the 23rd gender rule. And we've seen UDA has taken a lead on this. I think all the nominations in the Senate are all given to women. Yes. I applaud that as a woman myself. And he did promise on his campaign trail that he'll give 50% of the cabinet to women. Yes, and we've seen so far there are 7 women governors, 7 women deputy governors. I think we have about 29 women members of National Assembly.
National Assembly, correct.
And we have 3 women senators elected. So I think I look at the future of Kenya as very bright moving forward. I think long term, we're moving in the right direction.
All right, Carol, you have something to add?
Yes, on that 3 billion annually, I was hoping to see, because in the manifesto, in terms of the women's agenda, I just wanted to do an addendum on the gender agenda, as it's called. There was a promise to have what they were calling gender desks at the police stations for specifically sexual and gender-based violence. I was hoping, and I'm hoping to see that part of that 3 billion that has been added to the judiciary annually will also go towards establishing a special victims court, or a special court for victims of sexual violence, gender-based violence, and things of that nature. Because if we think that some rape cases are taking, because the courts are clogged, I mean, if we started a small claims court, I think we can also start a special court for the survivors and victims of sexual violence, including revenge porn. I think we need that, where specifically these cases are channeled towards. Because what you find is that these cases, because they're going through the usual courts, sometimes take years to resolve. You can imagine someone who's been a victim of gender-based violence. Like there was this lady, I think from, was it Machakos or Makueni, who had both her arms chopped off.
Machakos.
Yes, it was in Machakos. I don't know if that case has ever been resolved. And the length of time it took, you find this person who has already been traumatized, keeps getting re-traumatized by different court appearances. You go for a court appearance and you're given a date and another date and another date. So I think the way we established a children's court, we established a small claims court, and I can see there are some other courts there that are actually going to be established. I am hoping to see a special court for these specific cases to be channeled towards, so that at the end of the day, we also have these cases handled expeditiously, and we have justice that is not, we have fairness in some of these cases, because it's very difficult. Because once you have these gender desks, it means that we are hoping that the people who will be manning these desks are going to be people who are trained, in terms of even taking, these accounts. I have seen cases where a rape victim has gone to the police station, and you find that you're in this space, and you've got drunkards in that corner. You've got some people who have been in a traffic accident in that corner, and then you're being shouted at. Talk louder! I can't hear you. you know, so you are in here, you've been raped or you've been attacked, and you are being told to shout and to, you know, there is no privacy at all. So I think that sensitization, once we take those cases and we make it conducive for people who have been sexually assaulted to go and give these reports, what happens to those reports going forward? So I'm really hoping to see the entire chain streamlined. You've got a gender desk, and then you've got ways in which through the hospitals you can have these, either if it's a rape kit or, you know, if it's a P3 or whatever it is, quickly facilitated, and then we have a special court where these cases can be dealt with so that the swift arm of the law can also be exercised. And once that is done, I think we are going to, that is also going to be a form of a deterrent, because many people actually committing these offenses because they know they can very easily get away with it.
Okay.
Yes.
Definitely something for the National Council or the Administration of Justice to think about.
Yes.
And speaking of the long arm of the law, you've actually segued us beautifully onto the next topic of conversation. We do need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll look at this question of the Inspector General of Police as an accounting officer. President William Ruto, in his inauguration speech, said, "As I address you, I have instructed that the instrument conferring financial autonomy to the National Police Service by transferring the budget from the Office of the President and designating the IG of Police as the accounting officer be placed on my desk for signature." We'll look at that on the other side of this break.
Mivida Garden City, a residential development within Garden City offering stunning 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, unique amenities and an urban green convenient living. Call us today on 0722 123 000. Mivida, my home, my life.
And now we join one of the greatest Kenyan athletes who, oh my goodness, I don't know how they did it. The weather here was very horrible. It was very cold. Let me ask you, Jimtai, how did you feel about the cold?
The gold was good because we had 3 golds, 2 silvers and 1 bronze. So for the gold it was fantastic. I love the gold. I'm talking about the weather. That's what I'm saying. The weather is good because of the gold. The gold are many more than the silvers and the bronze. Yeah, thanks. I need to run back to Chaberebe and get my reception.
To get Kale Genius, dial star 811 star 930 hash. Skiza, Na Nation.
Now this is a celebration. The finals, when 60-foot prayer can get answered at the buzzer.
It's more like 61 feet.
I mean, you gotta be great from game 1 and game 7. Because when the champagne stops popping, does anybody know what's left?
Legendary status, my man.
Yes, Dirk. Exactly. Oh my greatness.
Dave, this line is not going down, and you're burning up. But I'll sort you out, my friend. See that barrier? Go for it. Yeah.
Bing bang bing. Bam, bam.
Nation FM is the home of good music. And to find out how many people in this building believe just that. So we're going to do a single challenge, and I want you to come with me. Let's go check it out.
Sijui kantaona kesho, kaningali na uwezo wa kuifanya, nitaifanya hadi mwisho. Mwambieni huyo devo. Sijui kantaona kesho, kaningali na uwezo wa kuifanya, nitaifanya hadi mwisho. Mwambieni huyo devo.
Mwambieni huyo devo.
Wasn't me. She even got me on camera. Wasn't me. She saw the marks on my shoulder. Wasn't me.
Mkubwa, yes sir. Nimekama hapa biashara.
Umetoboa na hiyo Lexus yako.
Hai, I was make. Mkubwa.
and the Cooperative Bank pre-owned car finance scheme. Anyone with an income can walk into a second-hand dealership and drive out with a car that best suits them. With financing options from Coop Bank, it's that simple. Talk to us to find out more.
This is NTV.
Welcome back to AM Live. With me in studio, I'm joined by Dr. Caroline Mose and Asaska Labarakwe. Karibuni sana, ladies. Thank you for being with us this morning. I was remiss in not mentioning this at the start. Baringo Deputy Governor Charles Kip Ngok collapsed and died at JKIA Wednesday night. The Governor Cheboy confirmed, that is the Baringo Governor Benjamin Cheboy. He confirmed that and stated that the DG, his DG, now the late DG Charles Kip Ngok, developed breathing difficulties while on a KQ plane. KQ being Kenya Airways. All right, our condolences to the family. Definitely a sad turn of events. But on the topic of independence of institutions, and this brings me even to devolved units, and President William Ruto, in his speech, even as we get into the IG now being an accounting officer, also promised that monies for the counties would be released in a timely manner, would be dispensed, or rather the allocation would be dispensed in a timely manner in order to enable smoother service delivery at the county level. But Carol, on the question of the IG being made an accounting officer, what's your reaction to that?
I was actually more interested in the role of IPOA in all this. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the history of the police, and we've sat even in this studio and we've talked about the police. The police have wielded a lot of unconstitutional power. A lot of extrajudicial killings have been committed by the police. With the protection of their higher ups, we must believe and assume. Because when you have people, we are still talking about the Kianjokoma brothers, who we've not had anything that has happened on that case. We have parents who still have their two sons who are lying dead in their graves. And these are not the only ones. The case of Willie, for example, took 6 years to resolve, and there was evidence to suggest that that this lawyer and the other 3 gentlemen that were killed alongside him, that these crimes were committed by the police. So I am less concerned about the police being funded, which I feel, if it's not done within context, and is there a context in which we can even fund the police? Outside context is not solving the problem. I'm more concerned about IPOA. Where do we, once we strengthen the police and make them very powerful with their own funds, and you have the IG as an accounting officer, who do we report all these ills that the police commit, from petty, if you can call them petty, traffic offenses, where we know that they take money from matatus on a daily basis, where we know that they're doing all kinds of things, hiring out their guns, and many of the other things that they have been accused of doing. What happens to a stronger police, a better funded police? Are we saying that funding the police makes them perform better? And then who do they become accountable to? And I know that IPOA is one of those independent institutions, and my key concern is not even on that. My key concern is on who do we report the police to? Because I'm not seeing anything being said. Yes, there was, a human rights-based approach in terms of how the government intends to work with the police. But what does that translate to? How does that look like in a Kenya where we don't trust the police at all, at all? You know, if you're walking down the street and you see a policeman, you start to ask yourself, do I have my ID? If you're driving down the road, you're asking yourself, do I have my license? Are my tires looking old? Because we have a very chaotic, you know, all our interactions with police have always been chaotic. And the police have also been used by the state as their baton. If the state wants to clamp down on any protesters, it's the police that have always been used. So I am more interested in who do we report the police to if they continue to be rogue, if they continue to operate the way they've been operating, which is highly problematic, and in many of these instances, also criminal. So I'm more concerned about police reforms at that level, not just as saying we are going to fund them. Am I saying funding them is the wrong thing? I think the jury is out on that. The history of police has always had its roots in racism, because not just here, across the world, the police has always been an arm of the state to crack down on dissenters and to crack down on people the state deems undesirable. So how do we move on forward from that history, which is a living history, going forward? And then who do we report the police to when they continue to behave the way they've been behaving? So for me, those are the more pertinent issues that we have here.
Okay.
Yes.
So when you talk about cracking down on dissenters, is this move more about protecting the political class? When Rigathi Gachagua took to the podium to deliver his speech, his inaugural speech as a deputy president, he really went in on the police and talked about, no, you don't have to use WhatsApp or encrypted messaging services to deliver your messages. You can speak freely. You will not be targeted by the police. Is this more about protecting the interests of the political class, or truly about entrenching the independence of the police? And I ask this because you talked about William Ruto being firmly in the Jubilee administration in the first term. And in December of 2014, and there was a lot of uproar over this, President Uhuru Kenyatta signed amendments to the security law. And I'm reading here a report that quotes Dennis Okari. Yes. He was working for the BBC at the time, but Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has signed into law a controversial security bill which saw MPs trade blows in Parliament. Mm-hmm. And then the government said it needs more power to fight militant Islamists threatening Kenya's security. But this caused a lot of uproar as in the civil society, especially as it removed the security of tenure for the Inspector General of Police. So does he have now the moral authority to lecture us on that is William Ruto, who I'm referring to, who was firmly in the Jubilee administration when these amendments were made. Does he now have the moral authority to lecture us on the question of police being independent? Asaska.
Olive, it's always good to go back to history as we look into President Ruto's pledges that he gave on his first day at the office. That was yesterday. Yes, this is kind of the opposite of what happened back then under the first Jubilee's administration and right now. But also, let's not forget that all what President Ruto did is exercise Article 245 of the Constitution, whereby the IG of the National Police Service is given power to exercise independent command of the service. And I think let's look at also as on the finer details, whereby this is just President Ruto implementing what the Constitution says. And for me, I'm not opposed totally to the financial independence of the National Police Service, because for the last couple election cycles, we've seen, or different political camps did allege that the national government administration officers have been massively misused in running political campaigns for the incumbency. And I think this financial independence will bring about, will separate the powers since the PS Interior has been the accounting officer for the National Police Service. And I think this will give room, I believe, for the National Police Service and the IG to really discharge their duties, to avoid victimizations of people who come out and give what they think about the police and how the police have been misbehaving. And I believe that moving forward, Olive, that I think this is just a good start. And I agree with Carol here that we need to know what powers or more strength will be given to IPOA, because I think that's where the power should move to.
Yes.
At the end.
Okay. We'll see how that plays out. I'm seeing a report here on the Star by Cyrus Ombati. And he says among the positions that are up for grabs include the Inspector General of Police and his deputies. If there will be changes in the positions, this will automatically trigger realignments in other directorates of the command chain. The same applies in NIS, where the president may decide to change the directors as per insiders. The holders of the offices, so I stand corrected here, have the security of tenure, and if any, the president may move them to other departments in the government. The IG is appointed for a single 4-year term and is not eligible for reappointment. The term of the current IG, Hilary Mutyambai, ends next year in April. At the Kenya prisons, officials said they anticipate changes, but not immediately. Officials in the new government say President William Ruto is likely to make changes in the coming days and has names of the people he would want to take over there. And yeah, you can find that report in the Star. But speaking of other independent institutions, we have here in furtherance, this is again the inauguration speech delivered by William Ruto. In furtherance to this oversight, institutions such as the Auditor General and the Controller of Budget will be adequately funded to execute their mandates. And still on the topic of independence of institutions, MPs retreat to share House leadership. President Ruto's Kenya Kwanza Alliance MPs will be in Naivasha tomorrow and Saturday, tomorrow being Friday. Raila's Azimio coalition has organized a 2-day retreat at Stony Athi Resort in Machakos County this weekend. And to segue us into this conversation, ladies, I'll invite you to flip over to the editorial cartoon of the Daily Nation. This is on page 18, and let me just open it on the touch screen as well, so we can all be looking at the same thing, because it informs the question I'd like to pose now. I hope I haven't gone too far away. It's page 13, isn't it? I have flipped. 18. 18?
Yes.
All right. Page 18. This is what, page 17, so one page over. Yeah, here we go. Vacancy. Leader of the opposition, William Ruto, there under a microscope. Let's see. I hope we can all see it now. Leader of the official opposition, proponents of handshakes need not apply. William Ruto has been very vocal that there will be no handshake on the campaign trail, that there would be no handshake between himself and Raila Odinga, but it appears he's shaken hands with pretty much everybody else. If you look at page 5 of page 4 actually of the Daily Nation, unease as Nyanza leaders jostle for a share of the hustlers' cake. Politicians who until recently were in Azimio have been trooping to the president to mend fences. So speaking of independence of institutions, how independent can we expect the National Assembly to be, even as they retreat to strategize over House leadership positions?
First, I'd like to make reference to that editorial cartoon. I think it's very, very telling. And the reason I say that is because William Ruto has been talking about an opposition in almost every speech that he makes. But the Constitution does not necessarily have a role of an opposition. But if I was to take you back to the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto, he did say under governance that he would establish by statute an office of the leader of the opposition with very key mandates, including receiving reports from the ombudsman, from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, from the Auditor General, from the EACC, from parliamentary oversight committees, and from IPOA. So I don't know if these are the plans that William Ruto has, because every time he talks about opposition, and he has even said in one of his speeches that an opposition is important to keep government in check. And in the current constitution, because we don't have that role of the opposition, it's been very difficult to say which side the House sways. This is you know, especially in the last 10 years, this is the parliament where we had, you know, that lawmakers were being given money in the toilets to vote one way or another on very crucial bills and to speak in one way or another on crucial matters that were being introduced on the floor of the House. And I think I personally think that we need an office of the leader of the opposition with very, very specific roles, you know, like a shadow cabinet, you know, of sorts, where the work is, and I always say the work is always done in parliament. But the current parliament that we have, because everybody wants to be in power, and MPs will say that nobody wants to be in the cold. And that is why, even to my own shock, I mean, in the weeks after the election, I sat here and I had to swallow my words in saying, you know, I was very excited about the independent candidates. And I kept saying, I'm hoping to see, you know, an independent caucus. There are only 12, but they, you know, they have power. And within 2 days, I had to swallow my words right here, because 10 of them, if not all of them by now, had already switched, and they had gone to Karen to pledge allegiance to the president, which I think is very retrogressive politics. It's very retrogressive. We can't all be sitting in spaces where we are pandering to power. This person is in power, so we must be on the right side of this person. What does that say about our country? What does that say about our constitution? It means that if you appear to be on the wrong side, quote unquote, of the person in power, then you are immediately ostracized. Immediately nobody listens to you. Immediately you're on the fringes. And that is not how it should be in a healthy and independent, in a healthy democracy, which I want to believe is where we are. You know, we had all these presidents, and there was a joke at the inauguration that majority of the presidents would not hand over power the way we've, I mean, is it Museveni who has witnessed all our handovers of power?
I saw that meme
yes.
being circulated.
I mean, he's been here so many times, it's like, oh, are we going back again? Yes. So we are a fledgling democracy, but we are growing, and I think we are the envy of many people and many other nations. In such a democracy, I mustn't always bootlick the person in power for me to have a say in how my country is run. And so when I see these kinds of things, people trooping to pledge allegiance to the president because they want him to see, we are not opposing you, we are on your side, I don't think it's one side or the other. We should be on the side of Kenyans. We should be on the side of, we need to reduce the price of fuel. We need to reduce the price of unga. How do we do that? Whether we were in the same political party or in the same political coalition or not. And for me, I'm very passionate about this. And I sometimes get annoyed when I see some of these shenanigans. Why are you going to see him? Why? Because you want him to see that you are on his side. Why? What about the side of the people? How are you serving your people if all you're thinking about is your own political survival in the House because you are on the so-called right side of history? We are all on the right side of history because we all cannot be on the same side. And I keep saying that. And I always keep saying, I don't believe in seeing things in dualities. Oh, you are either on Kenya Kwanza or you are in Azimio. Why? There's so many shades in between. And I can be in Kenya Kwanza and still disagree with the things they're doing. I can be in Azimio and disagree with the things that they're doing. That is what it means to be in a healthy democracy. Are we building a healthy democracy, or are we now just going to build you know, what Miguna has been calling despot, you know, this despot and all this hard language? Is that what we are perpetuating in this country? That I cannot sit here and very objectively, or try to be objective, or transcend my biases and say, I disagree with what William Ruto is doing here and I agree with what he's doing here. What's wrong with that? So, do we need an opposition? Yes. And this is not about handshakes and things like that. We need a center of power in Parliament, in Senate, where we check the government, because power corrupts. At some point, when people start feeling they're in power and they start feeling they're sacred cows, we will meet them in traffic, pushing us off the road because they're in a hurry, or they woke up late, or they just don't want to sit in traffic for 1 hour on Thika Road or on Gong Road. We will meet them driving on the wrong side of the road because they are wakubwas, and they have got bodyguards, and they have got all that, you know, that siren thing that strikes fear in the heart of everybody. We will meet them doing these things, but they shouldn't. They should create a polity, a country where everybody, you know, as our new president says, all animals are equal, but are some more equal than others. We will see these kind of shenanigans of going to prostrate themselves and kiss the ring. That is showing that they want to be more equal than others. And for myself, I find it absolutely unnecessary, if not a tad disgusting. We need opposition. It's healthy to keep people who are in power in check.
Okay.
Yes.
You quoted power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Exactly.
What's your position on this, Asaska?
Thank you, Olive. For sure, we all know that nobody wants to be outside power. You know, nobody wants to be in the cold. And I remember, I think in 2013 to 2017, I come from Marsabit, and my governor then was Ruto. They were in the opposition, and I remember we really did not get a lot of the national cake in Marsabit, particularly, apart from the devolved funds. So, I mean, coming from a very, coming from Marsabit, I'll say that, yes, I feel like I will not really judge the 12 independent candidates or my current governor, Mohamed Ali of UDM, and a bunch of other leaders from the northern frontier counties who crossed over to Karen just after elections. And I agree with Carol that yes, we need to empower the office of the leader of the official opposition. And definitely, I don't think we've seen a lot of independence in our legislature over the many years, because we've always seen that when there are laws that needs to be passed, or proposals that needs to be passed, or legal frameworks and institutional frameworks, we've always realized that there's a lot of lobbying on the corridors of Bunge all the time. And it's even alleged that some members of National Assembly did get money in the toilets. Yes. I mean, how shameful is that? Surely. So I think we have a long ways to go in building the independence of our legislature at Bunge. I mean, it's sad, but that's the reality of things, Olive.
That's the reality of things. All right, ladies, I'll invite you to make your final remarks on this question of independence of institutions. And even as we think of Bunge, I think, Carol, you mentioned, is it Carol or Asaska? One of you mentioned SRC. And do we expect them to be targeted as a result of reviewing those parks that benefit the legislators? There's been a lot of debate around CDF and the MP saying the CDF that was found unconstitutional is not the CDF which we are now operating under, which is the NG, National Government CDF. Yes. Carol.
I think that is where the rubber will meet the road with how William Ruto has been saying we will follow the Constitution and all these, you know, our beautiful institutions will remain independent. That is where the rubber will meet the road. SRC is one of those, a constitutionally mandated commission that actually looks at the salaries. And we know MPs are notorious. And I don't think these ones that have just been sworn in are going to be any different. Very notorious when it comes to increasing their salaries, increasing their benefits and things like that. I keep going back to the fact that this sitting parliament, this one, has been on record as wanting to add massages to their medical cover. This is in a country where the NHIF you pay might not even be enough to pay for a bed in a hospital in case you get sick and you need serious intervention, for example. This country. This is in a country where a majority of people cannot afford to pay the self-payments of NHIF on a monthly basis. And we all know if you skip 1 month and you go with your NHIF card to hospital and they check through the records and they tell you didn't pay for 1 month, it makes the whole year invalid because you could not afford to pay for 1 month. These are the kinds of people we have sitting in parliament. And one thing they forget is that they're all in power. As long as you're an MP and you are representing someone, you are in power. You are given the mandate by the people. No one is going to fire you unless we now wait for, I think there's a requisite, I think it's either 6 months or 2 years before we can now say, we are sick of you and we are going to remove you. And those procedures are not very easy.
Recalling?
Yes, it's not easy to recall an MP or any elected leader. So this, I'm curious to see, one, how Ruto will reintroduce CDF, because they had mentioned that they might want to reintroduce it when the Supreme Court, the same Supreme Court that declared Ruto, you know, this was a good win and everything that was being brought by Azimio was hot air. That same Supreme Court had said and stated that CDF was unconstitutional and removed it. So I'm curious to see how they're going to re-inject CDF that has been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court back into play, number one. Number two, how they're going to deal with SRC, which is an independent institution that is always at odds with the MPs, always at odds. So I'm curious to see. This is where I think the rubber will meet the road, and we will see if there are any sacred cows, or people are now going to start politicizing and playing around with these institutions because they're thinking of 2027. We must keep these people happy because, you know, we want them, their areas and their people to give us votes come 2027 when we're thinking of re-election. So for me, I'm curious to see how this plays out.
All right, Asaska, your concluding remarks?
We should remember that our Constitution 2010 did give us some guiding principles for all of our independent institutions. And if you look at Article 242, sub-Article 2, these independent institutions have been accorded constitutional protection to enable them discharge their mandate. And one of them is they're all subject to the Constitution and the law. There shall be no interference by any persons or organs of government with their operational functions. And these institutions must be accountable to the public. And I'm the one who did mention about the SRC, and we've seen 3 instances so far since 2013. First one was in 2013, when the National Assembly attempted to interfere with the SRC mandate in regulating the salaries of the state officers in Parliament. And the second instance was in 2019, when the Parliamentary Service Commission proposed house allowance, slashing of house allowance, and the MPs didn't threaten the SRC commissioners that they'll slash their salaries, you know, reduce their sitting allowances, yes, and any other benefits. And let's not forget that the Constitution, these independent constitutions are protected by law, and that's why all their monies, all their funding goes to a consolidated fund, so that nobody can just, you know, threaten or dictate what they need to do with their earnings. Olive, it's indeed sad that almost a decade plus of our Constitution 2010, we are still struggling with the financial independence of our institutions, functional independence of our institutions. It's quite shameful. And I believe moving forward, with our Constitution having entrenched these institutions, in order to distribute power, in order to give checks and balances in our open governance space. And finally, to conclude, we know that these independent institutions do play a significant role in consolidating Kenya's progress towards a credible culture of constitutionalism and accountability in governance.
All right. Thank you very much, Asaska. Thank you, Dr. Caroline Mose, good governance campaigner, and Asaska Labarakwe, public policy expert. Also joining us in studio now is one Zainab Ismail. Zainab, what do we have coming up on your world?
Well, a very good morning to you, Olive. Now, today, just want to talk about the issue of inculcating the reading culture among young children. I'll give you an interesting statistic right here. There was a research that was done and by Cadbury Dairy Milk Limited. They're saying 2 out of 3 Kenyan parents say they do not see the content, African content, represented adequately in the books that the children are reading. So then there is a campaign that has been launched. What is it all about? That is what we'll be talking about.
I'm sure Dr. Caroline will say for one, will be quite keen on that.
Indeed.
That is it for AM Live. We make way for your world with Zainab Ismail. I've been your host, Olive Burrows. Enjoy your morning.